Hello, I'm Bruce Bushert, president of USACLEAN, and today we're going to talk about propane buffers. I'm going to teach you a little bit of a history of propane buffers. I'm going to teach you how to troubleshoot and start a propane buffer. So, over 20 years ago, I purchased my first propane buffer, and I was buffing floors at a Walmart store, right? And it broke. And so I said, how do I get this fixed? So I called the company I bought it from, and they said, here's the company you need to go to. It's Larry's Repair. I said, Larry's Repair? Okay. So I drove across town here in Decatur, Illinois, and it was in this residential area with this guy's home and a garage on the side. I shake my head and I pull up and I walk in and say, Larry, can you fix my buffer? He says, well, what engine does it have? I said, it's got a 14 Kohler. He says, I can fix it. I said, okay, good. What do I got to do? He gives me a tag. He says, go put it out there. And I said, out there with all those lawnmowers? He said, yeah, with the lawnmowers. I said, outside? He said, yeah. I said, okay. I said, can I get it tomorrow? He says, tomorrow, Bruce? He says, you see all those lawnmowers? He says, you're after those guys. I said, next week? He says, he laughed at me. He says, could be next month. I said, holy smokes. I said, I got to learn how to fix these myself. This is crazy. This is true. I'm not making this part up. Yeah, I'll make a lot of things up, but this is a true story. So that's what I said. We got to get into fixing propane buffers. There was nothing in Central Illinois. Maybe if I drove 3 hours to St. Louis, I could have gotten it fixed, right? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of propane. I'm going to talk, secondly, about how to fix and to troubleshoot and make a propane buffer engine start. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about carbon monoxide and then a little Q&A. So history of propane buffers. First of all, everything you see today is Kawasaki. So back in the day, there was Tecumseh, there was Honda, there was Kohler. Onan got in the game real big, and then they crashed, and it was so bad that it failed so much that they got out of it. Kawasaki was around, but then they just came in and dominated. So today, if you don't have a Kawasaki, if you got one of those other brands, best not to try to fix it because it's not supported. So what you're going to focus on today is a Kawasaki, which is a 17 horse, and it's a propane buffer. Some people think propane buffer means that it puts a flame on the floor to make it shiny and heat it. That's not the reason it's a propane. Propane means the fuel that powers the engine as opposed to gas. So why do we want to use propane instead of gas? Propane is cleaner when it's tuned right, so it's safe to use indoors. Like when you have a fork truck is going to be propane, not gasoline. Gasoline puts out emissions that will make you sick. So a propane buffer, what it does to burnish the floor, it has nothing to do with fire. It has to do with making a pad spin really fast. And then it takes thermoplastic waxes, heats them up and makes them hard and makes them shine and resilient, and they kind of reflow, and it makes the floor look beautiful. So that's the whole point of a propane buffer. There's also battery burners. Propane has a big advantage because it never gets tired. You just switch the tank and keep going. So that's a little bit of the history of propane. Second segment is troubleshooting and getting your propane buffer to run. Now there's three things that make an engine not run. But before we get into the three things that make your engine not run, someone calls you up and says, my buffer won't run. So then, what's the first question you need to ask?
You got a propane?
Yeah, right. That actually, we're a little bit ahead. What you first of all need to do, because you guys are too smart, first thing you need to do is, does it turn over? They didn't tell me it didn't turn over, so you got to back up. Wait a second. Does it click? Does it turn over? Does the engine go bum, 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 make a noise? No. Oh, well, we got to get that part fixed first, right? So you got to check your battery. Number one thing you want to do is make sure you got 12.6 volts on your battery. You got to make sure that your connections are tight on your battery cables. So there's things we can get into on making sure that it turns over. Once you get it to turn over, now I'm going to jump into how to fix the propane buffer. There's three things that make an engine work. And you said fuel.
Fuel.
Phil said fuel. What else we got?
Battery.
Spark. Fuel, spark, and there's one more.
Air.
What's that?
Air.
Air, but air and fuel is
Same.
yeah, I'm just compression. Three things. So you got compression, fuel, and spark. So now we're going to talk about those three aspects. So compression is, you got two cylinders. So these are twin cylinder engines, 17 horse Kawasaki. One spark plug on this side, one spark plug on the other side, makes it a two cylinder engine. Compression is, you test compression by taking out the spark plug, and there's a process. So we want to refer to Keith's video, and we want to refer to that one. It's a 16-minute video. It's fantastic. That goes through how to test and set your compression, because these engines have. So we're going to talk all about compression first, and we're going to get into fuel, and we're going to get into spark. So these engines have solid lifters. Now back in the day, the old Kohler had hydraulic lifters like your car. Hydraulic lifters don't ever need set. Solid lifters, if they go too tight, what's going to happen is your valve isn't going to close all the way. If it doesn't close all the way, you don't have compression, right? So this is a head, one of two heads that if this isn't tight, if you've got a head gasket that's blown, it's going to blow out the side, you don't have compression. If you have a valve that's too tight because the solid lifter needs adjusted, it's going to blow by because it's not closing at top dead center, right? And so then you're going to have fire blowing out your exhaust or trying to come back through your intake. So your valves, you gotta to have compression. These have to close all the way. You have to have the head gasket tight. And back in the day, these used to warp really bad. They got hot because propane runs hotter. So they would warp just a little bit. You could always see on the one side, it would blow through. And then you put another gasket on it, it would blow through again. But they've developed these. Kawasaki did a nice job and developed this so that it fits tight, stays tight, doesn't mess up too bad. Now, you have to have compression, approximately 100 pounds of compression on each side. If you don't, then you can buy the head kit. This head kit is complete. You can get it from USACLEAN. This head kit's complete. You can put it on, and it will show you how to torque it on and all that stuff. So the first thing you want to know is you got compression, 100 pounds on each side. If you got 50 pounds on one side and 100 pounds on the other side, you can set the valves by watching that video. If you set the valves and it won't come up to the proper compression, then you got to get ahead. So next we're going to talk about the second thing we need to make sure that it works. We got good compression. If you got good compression, we're going to make this thing run because it's just fuel and spark from here forward. It turns over though, right? Of course. That means turns over. So fuel is really the part that trips up most good mechanics. Because the fuel is so simple that we get confused. I don't know how many mechanics have called me and said, I need a carburetor. I said, a carburetor is a hole. That's all it is a hole. It doesn't do anything else. On a gas engine, it's got floats and jets and all kinds of crazy stuff. So let me explain you the fuel part of this, and then you're gonna understand how simple this is. So when you see a fork truck, the tank is on its side. What does that mean? This one's setting upright. What does that mean? How does this thing work? Here's how it works. Propane that sets on its side is liquid fed. The liquid feeds down into the regulator. This is a vapor fed, like your gas grill. 20-pound vapor fed tank. How does it work? It's got a J. You don't fill it past 80% or you're feeding vapor or liquid into your regulator, which is not designed for liquid. It'll turn frosty and bust the rubber. If you turn too fast when it's full, slosh up in there, freeze it up, that's not good. So you can take it outside and vent it, let that liquid go off the top. So they came out with tanks a number of years ago that aren't supposed to be able to be overfilled. They got a safety. They got a triangle or something on the top. So it's not good when they're overfilled. That's not safe. It'll blow your diaphragm and it'll just mess the whole engine up. So now the cool part is with the J tube, liquid on the bottom, vapor on the top, your vapor is ready to combust. It's ready to make your engine work. But there's a problem. It's 200 pounds of pressure. That's a little much. That's why it's got to feed down through here. down through this electric lock off, I'll explain how that works, into your regulator, which reduces it to 5 pounds of pressure into your engine. If your diaphragm's blown, it's going to do one of two things. Not let any fuel through, won't run. 2, it's going to let 200 pounds through. What's that going to do? You know, if it gets through, it's going to run real rich and you'll be blowing fire out your muffler, right? It's going to burn things up. It's exciting, but it's not a good thing to do. So that's how easy these are, right? And so if you want to know if this is working, a lot of times I'll take a regulator to make sure I'm good. I just have a separate regulator, hook it up, plug it into the carburetor, make sure we're not got a problem in here, right? So another thing that happens with fuel is this thing here. Do we know what this is?
It's an actuator.
Nope, it's a lock-off. Safety lock-off, okay? This is your safety device. So this has 2 safety devices. This is what? Vacuum. This is what? There's another thing that's called an oil pressure switch. I'll show you on that because the lid's off, right? So we've got some safety devices going on here to let the fuel through. If you don't have fuel, it's not going to run, right? So now what we got is we got this lock off. So this lock off is normally open or normally closed. What would you guys guess? Normally closed. So it's normally closed until you put electricity, until you put 12 volts to it, and then it click, it opens up. So I don't know if we've got the key switch somewhere here where we can, if it wasn't turning over, if I pulled the starter wire off and you turn it over, you could hear this thing click, click, right? Click means it's going to open to let fuel into here, but it won't open up fully unless you're turning over to create the vacuum. So once you open up the valve, by the key switch overrides this momentarily, just momentarily on the start side. As soon as it starts and you let off, it shuts it, unless your oil pressure switch says stay open. How does the oil pressure switch, when there's pressure, this is not a splash lubricated engine, it's got an oil pressure, oil pump. When the oil pump is on, the switch goes closed and lets 12 volts through. The 12 volts goes to this solenoid, this lock off, that says let fuel go through. The engine's turning over, which creates a vacuum, says let fuel go through, right? So now we got fuel going into the engine. So now we've got compression and we've got fuel. Really simple, right? Let's go over this again. So we got liquid on the bottom, 200 pounds of vapor on the top, feeds into this high pressure hose down to the lock off. The lock off opens when you turn your key switch or the oil pressure switch is on when the engine's running. The regulator does what?
Takes pressure, drops down to 5 pounds.
5 pounds so the engine can handle it. And then what does this do?
Your vacuum.
The vacuum says open, and this is high pressure or low pressure?
Low pressure.
This is the high pressure, 200 pounds. This is the low pressure. Now it's vapor to start with, so it's beautiful. You don't have to vaporize it. It's not gas. That's complicated to me. I don't know how to do gas. Propane is the simplest you could ever do. Don't overcomplicate it. Okay, we got compression, we got fuel, and now we got to go to electricity. All right, number 3 to make the engine run is spark. So these engines are really super simple. This is called the flywheel. It spins around in a circle, and it's got a magnet on here, right there. And then the magnet spins by a magneto. When it spins by the magneto, it causes a spark to come down and spark your spark plug. It couldn't be any simpler than that, right? So when you replace a magneto, you got 2 8mm bolts. If you don't have spark, how do you check that you have spark? You can have one of those things you put on here that gives you a spark to tell if you got spark, or pull your spark plug out and see if it gaps, right? But if you don't have spark, you can replace the magneto by 2 8mm bolts, take them out, put on your put on your next magneto, and then what I would use, a real sophisticated tool, I mean, you can figure out what the feeler gauge is, but I'd use a business card. A business card distance gives you the perfect distance away from the magnet that gives you a spark. See, I just worked in the field and had to make it work, right? So these do go bad occasionally, and sometimes what happens, they'll get hot and then they won't work. And you have to let it cool down before it'll start again. So if you don't have spark on one side, replace your magneto. It takes about 5 minutes. Gotta have a business card. I'll give you one. I'll give you mine. And now you got spark. So we got compression, we got fuel, and we got spark. She's gonna start. So there you go. We just did troubleshooting and how to start your propane engine. Now the final thing we're going to talk about is just a couple other things, and we'll do any questions you guys might have. But so I want to talk about carbon monoxide for a minute. Do we have that meter too? So carbon monoxide is something that we want to control. So when you have good compression and you've got the right amount of pounds of fuel pressure, you're going to run pretty lean. So, thank you. You're going to run pretty lean. So these engines typically have a catalytic muffler. The catalytic muffler has honeycomb inside the muffler that'll burn up to 800 parts per million of carbon monoxide, right? So we want to make sure that it's safe when we send it out. I like less than 100 parts per million at the tailpipe. So you can buy one of these from us, these nice oxygen testers. We sent people out to do target testing one time, and they said, yeah, I was getting 0 parts per billion all the time. And I asked how they were testing, and they were going like this. I said, no, not in the ambient air. I said, no, it's got to be in the tailpipe. This is a weird tailpipe because it's vertical, but you got to be in the tailpipe, and you want to be below 100 parts per million. We get it down to 0 or 1, amazing. That's a really low number. So OSHA says something like 50 parts per million in the ambient air over an 8-hour period of time. We get this so low you can put your lips on the tailpipe and not get sick. You might burn your mouth though. So another interesting thing, there's a little plug right here. So some of the buffers have what's called an oxygen sensor, same as an automotive oxygen sensor. Some are 1 wire, some are 3 wire, typically 1. The oxygen sensor, if it gets past a certain parts per million, it will shut down the engine, it will shut off the lock off or shut off the spark, I don't know which one. This has just got a plug in the oxygen sensor hole, but it's an automotive oxygen sensor. So that is carbon monoxide. If you've got, I mean, there's not a standard that OSHA sets on your tailpipe. It sets it on the person driving it. If you're at a Kroger and there's good air movement, I mean, you could have, I like them at super low, so there's no chance of any sort of issue, right? Below 100 parts per million. And I'm not going to tell you where to put it because I'm not going to take the legal aspects of that part of it. But you get it below 100, and you're going to be looking good. So what other problems you guys seen? Anything you got questions?
This oil seal you spoke about, the main seal at the bottom.
I like that. So the oil seal, so the engine's got a PTO. So on the top of your crankshaft here, with your pistons going like this, top of your crankshaft is called your flywheel. On the bottom is a PTO, which has got a pulley on it. A lot of times it's going to develop an oil leak. And it's going to be on that main seal on the bottom. There's a main seal on the top, but it doesn't go bad. The main seal on the bottom, it's about that big. It used to cost $3. I don't know how much it costs these days. But what you do is you hook it with a little wire, coat hanger. If that's where it's leaking, you hook it, you pull it out, buy a main seal from us, and you drive it on. Takes 5 minutes to do that once you get it disassembled. And then you put the main seal on there, and then you take this tool, and then you just drive that main seal in place, and you're good to go. So like I said, these Kawasaki engines are rock solid, super easy to work with.
Is there like a full change period of automobiles, 3,000 miles, 3 months?
I like you saying that. So, and another thing is that everybody's like, you got to change your spark plugs at 100 hours, and you got to change your oil at 50. So what I do is, propane is amazingly clean. So I've seen spark plugs last 1,500 hours. They don't gum up like a gas, period. And the oil runs clean too. It's just a nice running. Yeah, it's super clean, but it's also a little hotter. But you don't honestly need to change your spark plugs every 100 hours. I'd go every 500. I would change the oil every 100. Filter. Here's a couple really important things. With a new engine, it's got a seat. And when you have a new engine, it's got metal grindings. And you want to change your oil at 50 hours, not sooner, but let it run. It does need to work in, and that helps it get broke in, right? But you want to change your oil filter at 50 hours and your oil because it's got metal shavings. And then you want to do it again at 100, and then you're going to want to set your valves. If you ever set your valves, you're going to want to do it within the first 200 hours because they might get tight, and then you're going to destroy your engine. If your valves are tight, you've got all that blow by. So if your valves are tight, that means it doesn't close all the way. If it doesn't close all the way, then you're burning up a lot of fuel. Your CO goes up, and it also can warp your valve seats because it gets super hot when it doesn't close and it's exploding through the valves, right? So what the big valve is intake or exhaust? Intake. Yeah. Yeah. The big valve is clean. That's your intake. And then this one you can tell is burned. It's your exhaust, right? So coming in, you want bigger for more, let the fuel in, and then your exhaust goes out the smaller one. You can see it's pretty clean. So yeah, you want to change your oil every 100 hours. And particularly keep your buffing and making dust. You want to clean your air filter. Particularly keep your bonnet clean. Because your bonnet, how are these cooled, these engines? Air cooled. And if you don't have air movement, what do you got? A hot engine. If it gets too hot, it might warp your head. It's going to deteriorate your oil. It's going to cause problems. So you want to keep your dust hood clean. And then you're going to want to also pressure wash this thing every once in a while. I love the pressure wash inside of here to get all the gunk out of the air fins so the air moves. So it'll move all the way down, all the way through with this fan. So, good question. Anything else? Good? Good.